where I taught on the Menominee Reservation, there were substantial economic barriers to access to education for most of the children. The county is considered the most impoverished in the state, and I think the parents had trouble connecting to the schools.
Well, we're the poorest county in Wisconsin. All of our students are free reduced lunch. I mean, it's total. We're also one of the poorest performing schools as far as standardized testing goes. But I think we have a real opportunity to move away from standardized testing. As a sovereign nation, I think we can reorganize the way we approach education and still continue to provide students a very quality education, well-rounded education, but look specifically towards Native viewpoints, Native ideas on what science was. We come from a very strong tradition of math, science, and I think that somewhere there's a disconnect, and we need to reconnect that, and that's our duty as educators, is to bring that love of science, that love of math, the observations of the world. You know, that's where we got our ideas from.
I think there's a historical factor there too with the experience of Native people and education, where with the boarding schools and you know how that was, I mean that's still affecting our communities today, intergenerational, the treatment of our people at boarding schools, and of course it was Canadian-wide, nation. It was I mean it even went to the Caribbeans. And Mexico, you know, that was a disruption of culture and family and disruption of everything. So the relationship has been a non-trusting one with education, and I think the reverse of that happened when students came home from boarding schools and they could speak English, and a lot of times they would come home and they couldn't even understand their parents. Their parents couldn't speak English, and they had lost their language. A long time ago, when people came back from the boarding school and they came in back to the community, there was a change in values and status, and I read some stories where they thought that they were, you know, better than, because that's the way they were taught, that attitude when they were in boarding school. And so they would actually, you know, oppress their own people after a time.
I definitely see that non-Native teachers and administrators really influence the way the school is run, for one. It's strange to me because it feels like on the reservation in the school, if you don't have non-Native people there, it's not an official school in the eyes of some people.
My grandmother went through probably the ultimate assimilation in the boarding schools when she was shipped off to Kansas and forced to give up her culture for that time period, and it had lasting effects throughout her life. But towards the end of her life, she started opening up and teaching me a lot of the old ways, you know, but it took decades for the effect to sort of diminish enough where she could step back into the culture and start teaching again. So there was a huge gap that's missing in especially Menominee education, where the culture was basically missing. 50s, 60s, 70s. And you can see that in the low economic status of the people, the feelings, you know, the loss of culture, you know, almost as if they're lost. There's a period where we were lost, and we're slowly bringing that back.
Education was used as a tool as a genocide tool, essentially, for a tribe who have almost lost their culture, and a lot of that was accomplished through the use of education, you have another layer that is terribly traumatic that is coming into play. So it takes longer, and it takes different kinds of conversations, and it involves addressing really difficult issues and giving space for conversations about racism and socioeconomic, inequities and things that I wouldn't have known that I would be facilitating.
I think it's too bad that we always have to prove how poor we are to get money. A community is never going to improve if people have developed the attitude that we have to prove our poorness to get money. Other entities in society, IBM gets money because they do good. We should have communities, if they're doing something good, especially Indian communities, if they're really good in something and people have to go around making the case of that we're really progressing and that we're really doing something good, and not ignore the other characteristics. You still work, but it doesn't propel. And so we have to get over that. But in order to get money to make a program go, in order for people to save their jobs, they got to get those grants. And if they know they're only going to get it by being the poorest, the most impoverished, the most ill health, the most poor jobs, I mean, there are some basic facts you need to look at. But that doesn't need to be what drives the whole attitude about a community.
What I hear in the Wisconsin idea and in the statements that matter to me that the UW makes is that the UW system is here to serve all of Wisconsin's people. And all of Wisconsin's people includes our Menominee Nation and Oneida Nation and all of those students who are often marginalized in schools. So I think this is important work, and we just forge ahead.
Thing amongst the Ho-Chunk people, how to share.
There is a political and a legal responsibility to be inclusive of the 11 tribes in the state of Wisconsin for any work that you do. In that sense, we need to have our education and academic community really dig deep into some serious resource commitment and care about developing curriculum, resources, policy, multi-jurisdictional agreements to truly understand. Otherwise, we're going to be having the same educational outcomes. Another reason I think it's of value is because almost 90% of our kids, and I've looked at data over the last 15, 20 years, go to public K-12 schools and they go to public colleges and universities. So it is critically important. Now people might say, oh, well, the state population is only 9% Native American, but if you literally count the number of heads, we have almost 40,000 children in our public schools. 40,000 children should matter. We have the highest dropout rates, highest suicide rates, the lowest educational attainment rates. We represent, I guess, the highest in the armed forces, but in terms of professional careers and STEM in particular, we're very, very underrepresented.
A big indicator that the Native American populations in Wisconsin are at risk is that their cultures are struggling to keep their identity and have young people learn the culture. So even the Menominee have 6 people who can speak the Menominee language fluently. So they're definitely struggling to hang on to their culture, and that affects their ability to figure out how the education system works with their communities, I think, and puts them at risk. The College of Menominee Nation struggles to have Menominee and other Native American faculty members who have the credentials to teach the courses so that they're being taught from the worldview of a Native American. So yes, these communities are at great risk, and part of it is believing in the students' ability and the students themselves believing in their ability. That there's been such a strong historical message that they're not capable, that just permeates the society. So education is an opportunity for us to transform that view.
They're at risk of losing everything, basically. The health of the people is not very good compared to how it was pre-contact times. Native Americans aren't living as long as the rest of the population. They're plagued with a lot of social problems and a lot of substance problems and a lot of poverty problems that people tend to just ignore because they see it as something that's a personal choice, when really it's a lot deeper than that. There's a lot of psychological problems and barriers that go along with that. Politically, they're in danger of losing their sovereignty all the time. There's always attacks by outside governments, for example, county government, state government, that are always looking to take back some of their power or jurisdiction over the tribal lands. So there's a lot of constant battles to maintain tribal sovereignty. I see every day as a war as a Native person, to maintain that good feeling of yourself and good feeling for your people, and try to look for ways of expanding knowledge of your own traditional culture and language.
I believe that any student can learn better if we bring in ideas from their place. I think that's very valuable for the Native community, because we're also bringing in aspects of their culture that can add to our instruction.
I was taught the nonlinear point of view by my grandmother and my elders when I was young. You know, consider all five senses. You know, you have a special relationship with the environment. You have no ownership over the environment. The only things you own are what was taken out of the environment or out of the living environment, and that's the only thing you possess, like a house or a chair or a car, that sort of thing. When I went to school, there was a totally different point of view, the linear point of view. Science is a good example of that linear view. I was taught that for 12 years straight. I lost the nonlinear point of view during that time. It was reinforced with how many years after school in college. Basically, I was living in that linear world, and it was probably the most loneliest time of my life. So I left school, came back, and got into school with a forestry program where I could reconnect with the environment. We're starting, as we collaborate more as tribes, we get back to a time back when we used to collaborate very closely with trade, knowledge, you know, plant knowledge, that sort of thing. Traditions, religious ceremonies were traded back and forth. I think we're going to come closer together again to that free giving back and forth that we used to have before European contact. I think it's really imperative that we do combine both in order to use the Native point of view that we have, but also the scientific tools with the linear thought process. I think it's important, it's imperative for us for our survival in the future.
A lot of the indigenous cultures throughout the world held at their core a relationship with a world that was beyond the visual and just the logical, what the mind could figure. So I think a lot of education that's science education in particular that has been foisted upon the tribes throughout the education invasion, you could call it, has them focusing on just the 2 or 3 feet in front of them, not recognizing the interconnectedness of everything that's around.
We all might have different perspectives and we might all have different questions, but what does that mean for what to write in the curriculum? What does that mean for how to support teachers and doing some of these, meeting these broader goals that we have for the students?
I think think it's very important that the education community understand, or the academic community, that when you talk about social, political, community, cultural, those are all different things when you are in an Indigenous context. In a very practical, concrete way, what that means is when you go and work with Indigenous communities, the political contexts are any elected officials. The social and cultural contexts are more for the traditional people, the elders and the teachers, right? And then the community contexts are for those people who are family, community leaders, educators, and it's possible to be all of those things. When you talk about social, political, cultural, just know that when we go in as educators, we are not monolithic even within our community. Man versus woman has a different answer. Elected official versus an elder has different meaning. Age matters, clan matters.
Well, I think collaboration many times is used sporadically. When they say collaborative, sometimes it meant just getting permission from Indian tribes. Sometimes it meant they sat at the table. They participated, but the voices were not strong. They may have been strong, but it wasn't incorporated much into the research. So I think there have been attempts where it has been growing, where it is more collaborative, where and tribes now have paid attention to people coming on to the reservation and doing research.
Buy-in is a big thing when people talk about change that comes through implementing curriculum. And it's true, you need key people in the community who are ambassadors for the project, so that you get a critical mass of people saying, this is a great thing, you should try it, come and see it.
Collaboration equals buy-in my mind. Anytime you can work together with a multiple group of people from multiple cultures, from multiple situations, looking at the same issue from multiple lenses, that's when you get the buy-in that you need for something to be successful. And I think in the situation of POSOH curriculum especially, since we have been involved in so many different pieces of this puzzle, utilizing tribal elders, utilizing multiple tribes to impact the education that we're creating, I think the success rate is there for this to be a curriculum that stands the test of time.
I think this version, one of the main goals is to kind of think about how to build.
More than the space that you bring people together, you need to really facilitate an experience where people are comfortable sharing and talking and don't feel like their perspective is going to be right or wrong, but that it's going to be valid no matter what. And I think that's a challenge in a lot of education systems. I think that there's certain hierarchies that sometimes get in the way of people being open and willing to share. And so it takes an effort to do that.
I've been a product of tribal education all the way up to coming to Madison. I went through St. Anthony's School in Neopet for grade school. I attended the Flandreau Indian School, a BIA school in South Dakota, and pursued my secondary career at the College of Menominee Nation. So coming from that really unique perspective into the larger University of Wisconsin system has, for me, really been an enriching experience, and it's caused me to reevaluate the education that I have received and just how culture has fit into that.
It would take a lot longer in the classroom. I am a proud product of Green Bay Public Schools, and as a Native American person, I often felt like my voice wasn't heard and I didn't exist as a cultural being in the public schools. Even though I saw other faces like mine, we were never given a space to really come together in a meaningful way in the classroom. And I think the projects like the POSOH Project bring that to the forefront and give those voices a way to be heard and also to connect with other people.
With the schools around here, the border between reservation and not reservation is very distinct. that creates a lot of misunderstandings between people, and so integrating culture into everything would be really important, because it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's STEM or math or English, people need to address those issues. Otherwise, it doesn't matter if you have the best technology, because there's going to be still social conflicts between people.
Over the last couple of years, the big thing has been testing and the standardized tests. I feel a lot of these are overdone. There's too many. Where's their base coming from? For what population of students? I think there's things on those tests that some of our children aren't familiar with. Our kids are over-tested to the point of it's too stressful for them. And I really don't think they give a clear, true picture of where kids are at. So it's not a true reflection of knowledge, especially for different other cultural populations, because those students who don't have an understanding of the dominant culture and all the intricacies about it, and they will not test as well.
In this era of standardized testing and high stakes testing, and looking at numbers as only black or white, is a student failing or passing, I think that it's really especially important to maintain the human component of a child not just being a test score, but also having a cultural background, or having a mixed background, or having connections to communities that do have diverse backgrounds.
One thing about Indian corn,
we're basing these ideas of failure at reading on standardized testing, right? That those levels are very low, and it may not be that it's the reading part and the understanding part, it's the test. The test is hard, and sometimes these students, they get tested 3-4 times a year, the same thing. I think they're just writing down answers just to do it, just to get it done with.
The projects that have those strong collaborative networks, and where there's strong participation and authentic participation, where everyone is giving and sharing resources equally, have been the most successful projects. If you look at what is published as best practices, whether in health and human services, economics, education, justice, are the ones that have those collaborative processes. But I also think that there should be a mix of Native traditional people and Native educators. There are different levels of social justice commitment or critical frameworks that people bring. Some people don't want to rock the boat as much. Others say, hey, what about this, this, and this? So it's important you have diversity amongst not only the Native, non-Native collaborators, but when you get feedback that there's diversity, age diversity, gender diversity, level of education diversity, hardcore traditional elders versus maybe elected officials or teachers, and also philosophical diversity, if you really want to get at this. Because if you have a conservative traditional Indian versus a liberal traditional Indian, you know what I'm saying, they're going to give you different types of feedback on the curriculum that's produced.
I think tribal schools need more tribal teachers, or people from Native American backgrounds, more leaders from the community in the classroom, interacting with the students, where they can see themselves, they can see role models, they can see their family, they can see relations that are all part of education. The kids can benefit from multiple pedagogies. The kids can benefit from multiple perspectives, and those don't always come from within the community. They could come from without, from without the community. They could come from another tribal community. So I think that the more voices we bring in, the more strong the collaboration will be, and the more benefits for the kids. One thing that I think will really help is by demonstrating that all of these collaborative processes actually increase test scores, because right now that seems to be mainly what everyone is interested in at the administrative level in schools. So I think that's one way of convincing people that what we're doing is good, is positive, creates real change in the minds of the students.
what I would like to see for our students is self-worth. You know, that knowing that our culture, our cultural ideas, our cultural knowledge has value to not just, you know, the people that are teaching them in our school district, but to other people now. I think we need to have our students be able to see that our cultural ways are of value to other people as well. And I think that would make a change. It would give our students pride in who we are and how we became who we are and how we are going to be moving into the future.
We need healing, we need education, we need to get everybody on the same page, and we need to develop that trust so we can move forward, one mind. That's the basis of it in our belief. We have to work together and cooperate.